Welcome to the sixth video on Guy riffing on A.H. Almaas's Pearl Beyond Price. I hope this moment, this day, finds you with immense objects constancy, and that when you woke up this morning, you were relatively the same person that woke up the morning before, and that I, as your self-object, is one that is, if not pleasant, at least is consistent. So, thank you. First, some housekeeping. If you are wanting to practice some of the things that we're talking about, we have Circling Dialogos, which is a course that I lead with John Vervaeke and Christopher. In fact, I think he's coming out with his series, which I got to be a part of, video series called After Socrates. I think that comes out this month sometime, if it hasn't already come out. And if you're interested in practicing, directly practicing with John and myself and Christopher and about 100 or more people together, which is an amazing experience. Those things that he covers in those videos in depth, and some of the things that we cover here, go to the Circling Institute website with the link below and sign up for the course. There's I believe there's an early bird discount up until 2 weeks before the course. Also, if you are interested in diving into and experiencing circling, which I definitely would recommend, look at all the links below. We have weekly events, we have weekend events, we have year-long events. I don't know, is a year-long an event? I guess it is, but a year-long course. Extraordinary, cool, deep stuff. So if you're interested, dive right on into those links. Also, if you are wanting to work more intensely with me, one-on-one, email me. Let me know, and we'll set up a exploratory meeting on Zoom and see if it's a fit. And I'll cover all the details with you then. All right. So today, where we left off last time is basically almost brought us up to this kind of more precisely the contradiction that we've been talking about since the beginning of the book between the man of the spirit and the man of the world. And basically kind of brought it down to where, when looked at from the psychological perspective, or the man of the world, psychology basically says that the self is a mental, has some element at least grounded in mental construction. In fact, your sense of self seems to be intimately tied to mental representations of both yourself and the world, and especially your early relations. And that without those mental representations, there couldn't be a sense of an individual. And that most pathologies, right, can be linked to the breakdown in the formation of those mental representations and constructions. And basically, the man of the spirit also says basically the same thing, that the ego is mental in representation. It's grounded in a kind of construction representation, but therefore it's not real. Whereas the psychologists don't really question whether or not it's real. They take it as the only reality that there is. Therefore, they don't compare it, right? They just kind of take it as self-evident that, well, you become a self through constructing images of yourself and then attaching to those. But the man of the spirit knows this other realm, which is a non-conceptual realm, the realm of being, right? And being is beyond any concepts, right? And therefore, enlightenment, which is possible to all human beings, right, is about ridding these concepts get in the way, or disidentifying with them. But I think there's a question, and I don't think we've got to this directly, but I think the question remains, though, is like, well, why then do all human beings form self-concepts? if it's not real, why do we do it? Again, my question is, did God burp at just the right time to in a way that he can't reverse, and therefore we all have egos? Like, is it just a a glitch in the matrix? Um, and I think too, for me, the question remains too is, okay, so we form these self images, right? But how is it not only do we form them, but we form them of the apparently the right thing, right? We don't form images of our left toe and then become identified with our left toe or the corner of the room or the cloud in the sky or something like that. We precisely form an image of ourselves, of our bodies, and of the parents' bodies. How do we get the aim right? Especially if we don't have any conceptuality to start with. How do we know? Right? It's a mystery there, at least to me. I'm sure Almaas will probably go into that. And the other thing is, is what is it if the nature of ourselves is non-conceptual? Why does that nature come to find itself through a representation of itself? If it's non-conceptual, why does it attach to a concept, right? These are kind of open questions, and I would even say conflicts in the understanding on both sides. So that's where we are so far. All right, so let's dive into the text. And I changed formats here so it's a little easier to read. Okay, this book, however, will develop an understanding which shows that the two perspectives, the man of the spirit and the man of the world, are not actually incompatible, and which further shows how they are related. Clearly, looking at things simply from the spiritual perspective does not do justice to the question of human living. The perception that life itself is a conceptual occurrence, which might be ultimately true, does not help us much to understand what human life is all about. As we will see at the end of this book, this perception is needed, ultimately, for a true human life. The absolute reality which we have been speaking is the source of the human being and the spring of all life. But human life is lived in the manifest world with all its differentiations, colors, and richness. To truly understand human life is to know the non-conceptual reality and still live a personal life of love, work, and knowledge. It is to know directly that we are the unfathomable reality, that all differentiations are conceptual, and still live in this differentiated world, appreciating its richness, variety, and beauty. For human life to be complete and balanced, it must consist of the harmony of all dimensions of reality, from the ultimate non-conceptual source to the varied dimensions. To the various dimensions of manifest existence. It must integrate a harmonious whole, the universe of the man of spirit and the universe of the man of the world. Otherwise, there is either no life or a fake life. So I hear Almaas basically kind of saying, look, we can't just split these two, right? Can't just say, the oneness of reality is the true reality, right? In exclusion of any conceptuality, right? Because it's our concepts that afford us to have the things show up as individual things, right? and be able to relate with them and have relationships with them, with other people, and all the world of distinction that the mind makes possible, right? So if we cut that out, we're cutting out, you know, basically all distinction and discernment, essentially, right? And we'll live in this one uncathetic, non-object constant, I guess is what you could say. So basically, he's just saying, like, it seems since both are true, to 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 be fully human, right, and to be fully whole, right, is to in some sense live in both in their maximum. That's what's possible. In fact, that's what is true because both are there. And I'm sure it's more complicated than that. Thus, there's like this much more of the book to go. A certain understanding will unfold in this book, which here we state in summary. In several different traditional systems and philosophies, human beings, along with the rest of creation, are seen to come out of or to be manifestations of higher realms of being. In the actual experience of these realms, there is not any sense of higher, but there are definite perceptions of the phenomenal realm arising from something that can be called non-phenomenal. And this coming out is not a random appearance of the various psychic, organic, and mental phenomena, discontinuous with the other realms, but rather more a structured unfolding. There is a pattern to this unfolding, and it reflects the structuring of being on the level that is called, in some traditions, the divine names, and in others, qualities of essence. In Tantric Buddhism, as well as in Taoism, there is an appreciation of the structuring of the qualities of creation, and certain Indian traditions, this also may be found. In his book on Sufism and Taoism, T. Izutsu states, quote, "The perfect man is the one whom the absolute penetrates, and whose faculties and bodily members are all permeated by the absolute in such a way that he thereby manifests all the perfections of the divine attributes and names." In the West, it was Plato who spoke of this level of being, referring to Platonic forms as what we might think of as an abstract blueprints for what is created in the phenomenal realm. Some traditions call this permanent archetypes. In this book, we will sometimes use the language most common in the Sufi tradition, speaking of the different qualities of essence, although much of the language is also unique to our work. This is partly because the Sufi tradition has worked most closely with the personal level of the essential aspects, identifying the manifestation of them in the person, even locating the centers of the different aspects in certain places in the body. Tantric Buddhism and some aspects of Taoism, and probably others, also work on this level. Our experience with many students over the years has shown that this model, used in conjunction with more Western ways of modeling human reality, is extremely useful for guiding students towards realms of experience beyond ego, since at the level the Sufis call the latifa, the essential aspects manifest to some extent in all human beings. Most people certainly don't experience this level as such, being identified with the mental, emotional, and physical content of experience. But it is relatively easy to learn to perceive this realm. In conjunction with learning to perceive one's ego from the outside, so to speak, this level of experience can lead one directly to a more profound level of being. In addition, the essential aspects, as we describe them in this book, are closely related to normal, experienced human qualities, such as love, will, compassion, strength, and peace. And in fact, the ego individuality itself is a reflection of the personal essence. Thus, our choice of this language for our teaching is designed to make these qualities more comprehensible and accessible. Our understanding of the essential aspect is discussed in much more detail in two other books by the author, Essence, The Diamond Approach to Inner Realization, and Diamond Heart, Book 1, Elements of the Realm of Man. Although we will show in some detail in this book, an identification with ego is incompatible with the complete experience of being, and thus the apparent dichotomy between the reality of the man in spirit and the experience of the man of the world has a very real basis. It is also true that it is possible for human beings, even in the process of moving towards identification with ego as children, to be open to the realm of essence. In fact, the arising of different aspects of essence is part and parcel of normal human development. Our understanding of how essence arises in children and then is put aside in favor of ego identification is a new and rather surprising set of observations, which at first glance fits neither into the object relations understanding of human development nor into the world of impersonal being. So essentially, he's saying, we're going to look at development, right? The development as it's understood in the psychological tradition, the world of psychology. And we're going to look at what spiritual traditions have called things like Platonic forms, right? The Latifa, right? Essential qualities of being that are non-conceptual in basis, that are you could say the locus of an unfolding pattern, right? And we're going to look at development with an eye towards those qualities of being and get a view, I'm assuming, getting a view of how how one can function, right? As with being as its source, right? Versus an understanding of mental pictures and conceptual phenomena and all the stuff that psychology kind of reduces our functioning to. I think Almaas is going to look at, well, we're going to look at development, but we're going to look at development from the aspect of being, right? And that out of that, we'll come out with a new vision of what's so and what's possible, right? And it's funny. It's something that you actually don't hear people talk about that much, right? There's tons of spiritual teachers and tons of non-dual traditions, right, that talk about being enlightened. But it's rare that you hear a spiritual teacher talk about how one functions at all levels from enlightenment, how one answers their emails, right, from enlightenment, how one responds and plans and, right, has goals and does all the normal stuff that, people do for basic functioning, right, and even thriving in a precise way, right? That's hardly ever talked about and definitely not explained is how that unfolds, right? How do you build a human life that isn't centered on a properly cathetic self-image, right? With reference to, right? If the basis of your life is on is grounded in something non-conceptual, yet functioning presupposes conceptual understanding, right? How does that happen, right? It probably happens in a very, very precise way with multiple dimensions to it. But that's kind of until now, that's a realm that's been unmapped, if you will, at least as far as I can tell. Almost goes on. Human beings are born into the realm of being, and from the beginning manifests the true differentiated aspect of being. This being is never totally lost and actually manifests in the child in predictable and supportable ways. It is true that awareness of this being is lost in the process of the structuring of identification with ego. But by understanding in detail this structuring and the patterns of identification, we can actually remember in detail the process of forgetting. We can remember, understand, and undo this forgetting, retrieving what has been suppressed and opening the way for growing into true maturity and realization. So this remembering, right? So part of the retrieval of being, right, he's saying is a process, or a big part of it is a process of remembering that we forgot. And it's interesting because I've noticed, that something really speaks to me in that, because I've noticed that usually when I have whenever I have like a deep insight, if I pay attention to the phenomenology of the experience of the insight, it always has this quality of remembering. And this harkens to Plato as well, talks about all genuine knowledge is always remembered, which presupposes that in some sense it was forgotten or concealed. And you can also hear in this Heidegger's, right, reclaiming or remembering the Greek original notion of truth being unconcealment, right, which is aletheia. And aletheia is the mythic waters of forgetfulness. So aletheia is an unforgetting. So this is really this has many, 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 many philosophical and ontological and theological depths in what he's saying is the process of restoration to yourself and to being, right, is a remembering of the disconnection from being. All right. He goes on. Thus, it is possible to experience egoless beingness, to be as a substantial presence that is not a mental construct, and still live a human personal life in which love, work, knowledge, creativity, and accomplishment make sense, a human sense. This true existence, this presence, this being beyond time that makes sense of human life and personal life is the personal essence. It is the reality of which ego is only a reflection. It is the truly integrated and developed human being. This is the beautiful presence that the traditional literature of work schools call the pearl beyond price. So he's saying that the personal essence for which the ego and its images are a reflection of, the personal essence is the heart of the personal as such. And I'm imagining, right, that this personal from the personal essence versus the reflection of it being the ego, is the ego in some sense probably is a forgetting of the pearl, if you will, right? It's a forgetting and a concealment of that the locus of its center, right, for which images and memories and everything gather around, the very gathering for which gathers your sense of personalness and all of the contents that become identified with it. The gathered is what we're more conscious of, and that's the ego. But the very gathering that gathers all of that together, the living dynamic of that, is something like the personal essence, or what traditions call the pearl beyond price. And that doesn't belong to you per se. That's an ontological aspect of being. I think that's basically what he's getting at. He goes on. The ego is a reflection of this true element of being, the personal essence. And exploring the characteristics of the reflection can lead us to the reality being reflected. By isolating and understanding the elements of the false, we can begin to approach the elements of the real. Okay. This puts us in part 2, the discovery of the personal essence. So I will end this video and we will start the next one at part 2. Thank you.